behalf of the dark, Hi, hello everyone. On behalf of the dark, I Pratham take immense pleasure to welcome you all to yet another session of the Dark Baithak. Before we jump into the session, a bit about what the dark does, what we try to do, what is the Dark Baithak. So the Dark Baithak began in 2023 as a book review journal publishing original reviews across disciplines and genres. From the very get-go, we have sought to reimagine the form of the book review itself, encouraging writing that moves beyond summary to engage deeply, reflectively, critically, and creatively with the world that a book opens up for us. Over time, we have grown into a biannual academic journal that now includes reviews, explainers, commentaries, and research essays. Each issue is built around a central theme, bringing together diverse voices that explore the intersections across social sciences. A double blind peer review process ensures rigor, while editorial approach values accessibility and creative thought. Beyond the journal as well, the Dark has grown into a vibrant collective. Through our reading groups, we meet every month to discuss a shared book, discovering new perspectives through conversation. Through the Dark Weekly, another of a segment, we publish personal essays, topical reflections, and explainers that extend our conversations into the present moment. The Dark Baithak is a humble attempt to bring together a small gathering of scholars, writers, and students from different fields to present ideas and initiate dialogue, bringing critical conversations to life. For this session of the Dark Baithak, we have Dr. Shannon Phillip. The title of the talk is Macho Vulnerability. Dr. Philip is an assistant professor of gender and sexuality at the Department of Sociology, University of Cambridge, and fellow of Girton College, Cambridge. He's also a research associate at the University of Johannesburg, South Africa. His first book is titled Becoming Young Men in New India: Masculinities, Gender Relations, and Violence in the Post Colony, which was published by Cambridge University Press in 2022. As the discussant for a talk, we have Dr. Devanik Saha. Dr. Saha is a lecturer in public health, teaching, and research at the School of Human Sciences, University of Greenwich. His research specializations include gender and intersectionality, public health, men and masculinities, maternal, reproductive, and sexual health, migration, and international development. He's also the founder of Reconceiving Andrology, an international network on male reproductive health, which aims to develop the conceptual and methodological tool to drive research in this domain. We welcome both Dr. Saha and Dr. Philip. A bit about the format of the discussion. We usually have our guests speak for about 20 to 25 minutes, after which we have comments, suggestions, questions from the discussant, and then we open the floor to questions from the audience. Dr. Philip, whenever you're ready. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Pratham. Thank you. I'm so delighted to be here and to be in discussion with all of you. I hope I'm audible and visible properly. Yeah. No, so I just want to start maybe a few thanks. So Sujukta, Jigyasa, Pratham, thank you for everything and organizing this and making this happen today. Devnayak, thank you for being here and being the discussant. So I'm quite excited. I really would like this to be a conversation, so I'd love to hear what you are thinking, how you are reflecting. And Pratham, as you were saying, this is a collective, so I'd love to hear how we might collectively think about certain questions. I have a few ideas that I want to put to you, and you may or may not have read the paper. It's been circulated. So that's the paper that was published. It's called Macho Vulnerability. And that's the idea I really want to unpack a little bit and think with you about what you might think or what you might take from it. So just briefly, I did fieldwork in Delhi almost 10 years ago, right? 2015, 2016 is when I was doing my fieldwork for my PhD. And I finished my PhD 2018, so a few years back now. And the book came out in 2020. So the 2015 moment was really on the back of Nirbhaya, right? Some of you might remember it also still. There was all of this discussion about how to keep Delhi safe, why Delhi is so unsafe, Delhi masculinity. So it was on the back of that that I wanted to do fieldwork in Delhi back in 2015. And it was really interesting because there were such heightened sentiments about violence and somehow men's violence towards women, and Delhi being a very aggressive city, there were all of these discussions about aggressive masculinity and things. And and the whole discussion was that we can keep Delhi safe if we have street lights or if we have more police officers. If we somehow get rid of the dark corners, more CCTV, that will keep Delhi safe. The discussion was not about why men are violent. The discussion was how to keep women safe, right? The problem of men and masculinities was not being talked about. The problem with men, how men are brought up, how entitled they are, how patriarchy operates to construct masculine privilege was not being talked about. So that became the main question for the book. And that's why the book is called Becoming a Young Man, right? It's the idea of how does one become a young man? How does society, particularly Delhi North Indian society, teach men to be men, right? How does one become a man? And you might know Simone de Beauvoir's fundamental idea, becoming a woman. That's her sort of important line that we keep using, right? So it was inspired by that, by thinking about how does one become gender, how does one become a man? Because one of the fundamental ideas is that men are not violent. Men are taught to be violent, right? The binary of gender is largely a social construction, right? That somehow that women are caring and men are aggressive or rational. This binary idea is a false idea to some extent. It's society that forces boys not to cry or to talk in a certain way, to walk in a certain way, to wear certain kinds of clothes, right? It's the performance of gender, the construction of gender, the becoming of gender. So I wanted to work on that and think specifically how do men get constructed as gendered beings in India, in particularly in Delhi, right? And that's where this book came from. One of the challenge, and I can tell you more about the book if you're interested. So yeah, I'm happy to talk about the book in more detail. But one of the things that I feel like I did not do in the book or in my PhD was really explore this idea of the vulnerable side of men, right? The book and my interest, after the Nirbhaya movement was on their violence. How are they violent? Why are they violent? How do we understand it? How might we stop it? Or something like that. And in the book, towards the conclusion, I have small sort of like hints at the fragility of men, the vulnerability of men, the tensions of being a man, right? And how these cracks manifest. And that's the project I want to keep expanding on now and I want to talk to you a little bit more. And that's what this idea of macho vulnerability comes from. And this is the new book that I'm writing at the moment on macho vulnerability, right? And the book is actually about India and South Africa because I'm doing some more research in other parts of the world. But I'll focus on the India material because I think that'll be a richer conversation. So how do we understand men's vulnerability in India? And this I think has to be a very careful conversation, right? Because we know that Indian society continues to be highly patriarchal, arranged marriage from son preference to the violence towards women, female infanticide. To talk about men as vulnerable, it's almost a bit silly given the range of violence that men also mete out to other people, right? Queer violence, homophobic violence, trans violence, violence towards women. And so it's in that dynamic that there's a tension that we have to think about. And again, you may have read the paper, but what I want to do is really highlight this tension, and I want to read you two small things from the paper, but also just other things that I've written recently, and I want to see how we might think about this tension. So this is from fieldwork that I did in Gurgaon in 2021, 2022 during the pandemic. And it's this one guy I want you to meet. His name is Deepak, and he works in a corporate office, right? And I want you to think how you might assess whether he is vulnerable or whether he is violent, and what you might say about him. And I have a few thoughts to add too. So I'll read this bit out, and then we can talk about it. So on a warm afternoon in Gurgaon in New Delhi, I was having coffee with a young 28-year-old middle-class Indian man called Deepak. We met in his swanky corporate office just by Sikandarpur metro station, where he worked in sales and marketing. We were discussing the rise of multinational corporations in India and their work cultures. Deepak candidly told me, girls are often getting hired in these corporate jobs simply because they are girls, not because they are good. They can have any ordinary degree from any ordinary university and they will get hired. But it's not the same for us guys. There is so much competition and there is no preferential treatment for us. No one cares about men really. It's all about women now. As a guy, you have to be very good to work here. I really struggled to get a job. And without a job, you can't really call yourself a man, can you? Deepak went on to explain the management in his corporate office. Our company, we are now 50% women. There is total gender equality because we have 50% women. We even have a director who's a woman. She's the director of HR. So things are not like how they used to be. They have really improved. With education and decent jobs, things we are learning, you can see these changes in workplaces. But you have to be so careful of women in the workplace, because they can make the slightest of complaints and you've had it. They will throw you out for sexual harassment or something like that. So I just prefer to hang out with other guys at work. I avoid women because I don't really want any trouble. I just want to keep my head down and do my work. But that didn't happen. This one woman has made a complaint against me. There is no evidence. I didn't do anything. I didn't touch her. I didn't talk to her. I didn't shout at her. I didn't touch her. I didn't take any. I didn't do anything. I just asked her out for a coffee, but she made the wrong meaning out of it. But the case will not come to anything because I know the guy is involved, the boss. He's on my side, so I think it'll be fine. And it's a lie anyway, so we will find out. So this is the story of this one guy and this one interview I did with a fairly elite, middle class, upper caste man called Deepak. Right? And this is not an uncommon story that I kept hearing in Gurgaon and in these corporate offices. More and more, when I talk to men, there is an imagined idea that we have achieved gender equality. There is an imagination that men and women are now completely equal. In this case, Deepak is, for example, suggesting there's even evidence, right, that corporate offices have quotas for women to be hired. They have 50% women. He has the one woman boss out of 38 that I counted in that particular office, who is a woman, a one woman director. And the woman director is also director of HR. She's not director in other fields, right? And we know from my previous research also that sexual aggression, men's unwanted demands and attentions are extremely high and obvious. So even in this office when I was doing field work, men kept making jokes about women, they kept taunting them, they kept making fun. But yet, they never saw all of this behavior as violence at all. They thought of this as, just fun and jokes in the office. And they still had this idea that somehow gender equality has been achieved because we have 50% women, right? And these interviews we did as part of a team. And so we had some women colleagues, we were interviewing other women who constantly kept saying that in the office, they are constantly having unwanted conversations with men. People are making remarks, jokes that are seen to be, harmless, but actually they're very strong microaggressions that are being made. Women constantly felt that they are in the room, but actually they are invisible. So they might be coming to the board meetings and the boardroom, they have been included, but their voices are not often heard. That they are still somehow not valued as equal participants in the workplace. In one of the other interviews, and it's in the paper that you might have read, one of the guys says that, oh, well, a job for a woman is optional. Even if she decides she doesn't want to work, she'll still get married. But if you're a guy who's not going to work, you can't get married, you can't have a life at all. So his point was that work is not optional for men, but it's optional for women. And so, in all of this, right, in this situation, how do we understand what's going on? How do we understand gender? Is the fundamental question, and the relation between masculinity and femininity, right? We, and I think that's why we have to think of this duality of gender and the duality of both the power that men have, the real violence that men do, the sexual patriarchal entitlement that men have, the macho culture that we have, but also these vulnerabilities that men are articulating in a patriarchal context, right? For most men, they think, the ones I've interviewed, they think that feminism is the problem that is causing them harm. But actually, it is patriarchy that is causing men harm. Right? And that's the point I want to make, that feminism can in fact be helpful for men if we were to start opening up questions of masculinity. So to understand men as vulnerable, we need a feminist understanding of society, but also men. Right? Without it, we have a very skewed approach. And this skewed approach is becoming more and more popular. Right? In Delhi, when I was in December and January, I was in Delhi doing some more field work. And this whole trope of men's suicides, right, that's been going on now. These men committing suicides and blaming women. And the whole idea again there is that men are feeling vulnerable, that women have become too powerful, that they now hold all the power and men are weak and vulnerable. And alongside this, we have a very strong men's rights movement that's also emerging, right? And that's a movement that various colleagues have written about, where men are demanding rights for themselves, rights as patriarchs, rights as fathers, rights as, it's a very aggressive, anti-feminist group of men who want these rights for women. These are men's rights groups. And they're very anti-gender, anti-femininity, anti-feminism, and very violent with how they portray it. So we are reaching a particular point where there is all of this conversation about men's vulnerability that's happening. The loneliness pandemic that men are very lonely somehow, right? And it is probably true that maybe men are lonely, but that loneliness is caused by patriarchy, by heteropatriarchy is my point, right? And so that's where I think this tension emerges, that we have to be critical of men, but also empathetic. And how do we balance that? Right? How do we understand Deepak, who's talking about the struggles of getting a job in India? We all know how difficult it is to get work, especially any of us trying to get jobs in academia or trying to sort of, you know, work work in related fields. It's very difficult to get work right now, and it has been for a while. So some of these vulnerabilities of men are structural, they are economic, they are, but they are also patriarchal. Patriarchy requires a particular kind of performance of masculinity, the becoming of a man. Right? If you don't have a job, if you're not taller than a woman, if you don't earn more than a woman, then you are somehow failing as a man. You are not a successful man. So patriarchy forces what a man is and creates a very narrow definition of that man. And it's a struggle for men to live up to that definition, to become these men. And that also produces vulnerability. So what we have is this complex dynamic between real problems and vulnerabilities caused by the economy, caused by structure, but also by patriarchy for men. And as a result, there is a scapegoating and an anti-feminist rhetoric that is emerging. Right? And we have to be very critical of this anti-feminist rhetoric, is what I'm trying to make my final point, I think. That men, masculinities benefit from feminism. We need feminism. We, in fact, need, I would argue that I'm a queer feminist, where I think about gender and its construction rather than men and women as stable categories. And I think we need more and more feminist thinking in how we think about what men are and how we address the question of men. I have several more things to say, but I want to stop here to see how you might react and what Devanik might want to have to say about this idea of macho vulnerability. But but what I want to maybe finish with is just this thought that we cannot make excuses for men's power, their violence, and their aggression. Even when that violence is invisible, it is my job as a feminist scholar to make that violence visible. Men say that they are gender equal, any man you interview, nobody will ever say he's sexist. It is impossible to now find a man, any man in educated circles, middle class circles, who will openly confess that beating a woman or doing violence towards a woman is acceptable, or dowry is acceptable. Anyone you interview, everybody will say dowry is bad, gender inequality is bad. They all believe in gender equality. But yet, violence, inequality, gendered violence persists, right? And so my point, I think, is that men's power is becoming more invisible, it is becoming more insidious, it is becoming more hidden. And we need new tools, new concepts, new ways of revealing this power. Men are not going to say, particularly the kinds of men I want to interview, middle class, educated men, they are not going to say that they believe in gender inequality. Yet we continue to face the inequalities of gender. So we need new conceptual ways of doing it. And at the same time, we have to still be empathetic to men. It is not individual men's fault. There are structures of patriarchy that require men to do certain things. So men and masculinities are two separate things, right? Men have problems. Masculinity is socially constructed. Not all men are masculine. Not all men do masculinity. We could have effeminate men. We could have men doing other kinds of things. So the problem for us as social scientists is to address masculinity and the construction, that the scripts that men are given. right? And that's what I want to do with this macho vulnerability. I want to attack macho culture, masculine culture, and not blame individual men, but try and empathetically understand individual men, their vulnerabilities, their tensions, and think of this in a dual dynamic. I'll stop there. That was a lot of different things. But yeah, maybe Dev Nayak or other people might have other things to say. So I'll stop.
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah, Pratham, go on.
Thank you so much for that. May I now request Dr. Saha to for his comments, observation, questions? Thank you so much for that.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Pratham. Thank you, Shannon. I think that was a very interesting presentation in the sense that what you wanted to work upon. Just wanted to, like, I'll start off with a set of thoughts, observations, and comments. So the first thing is that when I read your paper, so as I mentioned, I used your paper in my PhD in a very different context, and because my fieldwork was in Delhi, so I found some similarities in my PhD. But just to add that I had read a paper by a professor called Radhika Govinda. I might sure you have heard of her. So she has written around how the masculinity of taxi drivers in Delhi. So she has written about migrant masculinity, that how they construct their own masculinity within the context of Delhi. And her paper also expresses very similar concerns, where they say that where the paper argues that taxi drivers told their concerns to her that we are being seen as rapists, or we are being seen as men who harass women because of a certain few incidents. So I think in that context, your paper becomes really kind of interesting, where you introduce this new concept of macho vulnerability, which you talk about. So that is the first thing. The second thing which I wanted to ask is, which I feel that I have always grappled with, and maybe it's due to my positionality as a man that I have grappled with. So when we talk about sexual violence on Twitter, or I mean, X has changed very significantly after it was taken over. But let's say it was the platform before people used to discuss, right? So, for example, whenever we talk about when we talk about gender violence, sexual violence, right? So there's an always debate between the hashtag all men and not all men, right? So you might have seen this. I mean, everybody would have known about this. So I find this tension where this is, I think, a slight tension between academia and activism, where activists talk about, oh, yes, all men, right? But I'm not sure if you can, if writing an academic paper, right? So I'm not sure if you can argue yes, all men, right? So when we talk about yes, all men versus not all men, right? So how do we, like, analyze those tensions about gender, caste? Because of course, as you have written in your paper, and as we already know, that not all men are same, right? And they are differentiated by their race, caste, and gender and economic status. So I feel I personally struggle with this fight between academia and activism, where when we talk about women's safety, when we talk about gender violence, so what are the tension between not all men and all men? And this is my second point. The third is, I feel that where you mention about the corporate example of where women, you said that jokes are being made and gender equality has been achieved as a 50-50. So I would say that, like, again, like this discussion, like when I did a master's in gender. So when I started that master's degree, so I had a thought that everything could be achieved 50-50. But over the years, if you might have seen discussions around gender pay gap, and you might have seen discussions around household work, that the concept of 50-50 is flawed, right? That, okay, that women should contribute 50-50, even if they are earning less than the husband in a family, or if they are like dating each other. So my point is that these tensions around the gender equality, what is a 50-50 tension, right? That is something, and I'm not sure that is related to your paper, but I because you mentioned the 50-50 bit, that kind of intrigued me. And finally, like to like I mean, before we jump in, I come back to you, the final discussion is that you use because you used a lot of you use the term feminism quite a bit, right? Which is totally agreeable. But I feel that, given we talk about men's lives, right, and if you're engaging with men, right, because you say that most men blame most men blame feminism, which is true, that okay, because of feminism, all nobody thinks about us. Do you think, rather than using the term feminism, or rather than using the frame of feminism, if we use something called the term of gendered beings, which I think you started the conversation with, that you want to, that your paper looks as men as gendered beings. So I'm just looking at that, whether we use feminism as a lens to analyze men's lives, or whether we go back to gender as a lens or a framework to analyze men's lives. So those are the 4 points that I had initially.
Yeah, maybe I'll respond, Pratham. Is that, yeah?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
no, thank you. Yeah, yeah, what important and interesting points, right? I have so much to say on so many different aspects of this. Maybe I'll start with the last few things. Absolutely. 50-50 doesn't mean gender equality at all, right?
Yeah,
The inequality of gender is a cultural, social phenomenon that is almost difficult to see. There are inequalities that are very profound, that shape society, shape how we interact, how we dress, how we walk, how we talk, right? So the 50-50 is only the symptom of that. And the problem with a lot of corporate offices and middle class offices is that there is an obsession with numbers and somehow equalizing the numbers, right? And and that doesn't address the deeper structural inequalities of gender. So as I was saying, in Deepak's case, in these offices now there are maybe more women in offices, and we need more women. So yes, absolutely, the 50% is important in some level. We need more women in places where there are no women, right? That needs to happen, but that's not enough, because that doesn't shift the power inequalities within society. Like in the metro, for example, in my book, when I was doing field work, the Delhi metro, I'm assuming that a lot of people know Delhi, the Delhi context. That there was an understanding that women's carriage is one carriage in the front, right? And then the general carriage is men's carriage. So often when I was interviewing men on the metro, they would tell me, "Oh, ये औरतें हमारे carriage में क्यों आ रही हैं? उनका तो आगे, आगे उनकी carriage है, तो वो वहां पे चली जाएं, यहाँ पे क्यों आ रही हैं?" When it was really packed. And that's that sentiment. Somehow this quota, this 50% mentality creates this idea that if you get women something, then that's enough. They should stay there. But mainstream society doesn't have to become equal. The rest of the train doesn't have to be 50-50. It's not a shared space. So I think that fundamentally has to shift. We have to think of patriarchy as very pervasive everywhere. Women belong on the train wherever they want, right? But they still need a separate carriage, absolutely. That also needs to happen, but more they should and need to occupy the 50% of the rest of the train too. So that's one of the points I wanted to make, that in now thinking about gender and gender inequality in the latest sort of feminist discussions is not even about gender equality. It is more about gender justice, right? Because equality is a flawed concept to some extent, that we are trying to make men and women equal. But there cannot be equality when there is so much inequality. But we are trying now for justice, gender justice of some form, and likewise queer justice. So what would that look like, right? In a way, having 50% office in women in the office is equality of some form, but that doesn't mean they are treated justly. When women are complaining that yes, we are now 50%, but we are still not heard in the meetings, our views are not taken seriously, there is an injustice that is going on towards them. So I find this idea of moving from gender equality to gender justice quite a helpful way of thinking. The same with queer rights, for example. As a queer person from India, now we've removed section 377 and things like that, and we have some more legal rights as queer people, but that doesn't mean there is queer justice in the world, right? People might still look at me on the metro if I'm wearing something, or people might still say something to a trans person or a hijra or somebody else, right? They might not have, we might not be legally discriminated, but the inequality of patriarchy, heteropatriarchy, is very profound. So that's why we are also now talking about queer justice rather than just queer rights, because rights are only one thing, right? Rights we've got the law, but that doesn't mean there is a social and cultural change. So that's what I want to say. And that connects to this idea of all men, not all men, right? The problem, I think, is not about individual men, that this man is violent and that man is good. That's too, uh, that's not helpful in many ways, because every man thinks he's a good man, right? That, oh, these men who I would interview, they would tell me, yeah, I believe in total gender equality. I allow my girlfriend to wear shorts in the shopping mall. I allow my girlfriend to wear shorts in the shopping mall. Why is that happening? Right? He claims that he's a good guy, yet he has to allow his girlfriend. Why doesn't she have the freedom to do whatever she wants, wherever she wants? So, is he a good guy or a bad guy? Right? This idea between all men, not all men. So I think the point is not to try and find individual good men, that you know, find good guys to date because this guy is a toxic guy or that guy is a good guy. You know, that's too binaristic. And I think we need maybe more of a cultural conversation that is not individually blaming men as good or bad, but saying that all men need to respect all women and all of society, right? It's not about being that you don't hit women. No one should hit women, and there should be equality between men and women, right? It's not just being a good guy or a bad guy as an individual. It is a social and cultural phenomenon. So that's what one of the important things I wanted to say, because it's precisely my kind of participants, Deepak, who we met, who's a corporate office going, educated, English speaking guy, who says all the right things. You know, the migrant men that Radhika Govinda is working on, like as you very importantly pointed out, they are driving auto rickshaws, cycle rickshaws. You know, they don't have the language that Deepak and the corporate boys have because they're sitting in Starbucks and I'm interviewing them in a Starbucks and they have watched enough Instagram reels. They know what the right gendered language is. So they say I'm an ally, I'm a warrior for women. They'll have all kinds of lines to say. So if you start looking for good men, men like Deepak always come across like good men, right? Because they know all the right things to say. They will never say that they believe in inequality or they will hit women. So that's the other thing I wanted to say. In India, we have such a divide between this idea of this dangerous man. You know, so for Deepak, for example, he would think that the only people who are violent in India, the only men that are violent, are the poor, uneducated men. It is the Dalit man. It is the migrant man. It is the rural man. You know, in my book, they used to. I remember it's in the book. They used to keep saying, "Oh, ये छोटे शहर से लोग आते हैं. They come from small towns and they get shocked in the big city. And then, you know, these men commit all kinds of violence. It's not us, the Delhi boys, who are violent. It's these other migrant men. It's these other poorer men." So that's another really important thought, that we have to critique, we have to move beyond thinking that somehow poor people are dangerous, right? That's the common trope, to thinking about how class, inequality, caste, all of this manifests to create inequalities. And to bring all of this together, maybe last point is that I still think feminism is the framework I would like to use and continue to use. Because feminism is not just about women, it is about society. And feminists are talking about all forms of social inequality, you know. And within feminism, we have queer feminism, we have Dalit feminism, we have black feminism, we have disabled feminism, we have, you know, a range of feminist thinking. And I think feminist thinking for me still is my intellectual anchor. I cannot not think like a feminist. So I think there could be other words, but and I want to be deliberately, you know, challenging masculine power to some extent. I also enjoy a lot of masculine privilege in the world. You know, I look like a man, people treat me like a man. Even in Delhi, I am treated like a man, right? Whatever, I have all forms of privileges. But I also want to critique that. And I want to sort of challenge it. And I want to put a feminist challenge to it because I think that is my kind of, my sort of intellectual fight, my activist fight in that sense, you know, to bridge activism and academia, as you're saying. To me, yeah, I'm more of an academic and a scholar than an activist, but where I am potentially an activist is the question of gender and creating space for gender and difficult conversations about gender and sexuality. So that's, I think, what my take is and why I think I would go back to feminism. So I'll stop there again.
Thank you so much for that. I think this was very insightful. Now, if Professor Dr. Saha has any other questions or any concerns or comments.
No, I think we can open up to questions and other people, and then I can come back later. Yeah, I think we
Sure,
should
sure,
open up
sure.
to questions and thoughts from other
Yeah,
people. Yeah.
sure. Requesting anyone who has a question to either kindly raise their hands and unmute themselves, or they can also type out their questions in the chat box. You will read up from there. Yeah. Yeah, I think Mehak
Mehak has a
yeah,
question.
yeah.
Yeah,
Go
yeah.
ahead.
Thank you so much. This was a really wonderful session. I had just some certain thoughts regarding that. So like the example you mentioned about Deepak, right? And even while you were mentioning that, this person, so to say, believed in this idea of gender equality, while on the very hand, they mention that, oh, the same HR would then side with the, so to say, man with me. So my question was that, there's a majority of, so to say, cishet men, where they sort of convey these ideas of patriarchal beliefs, which is to say, largely, although they say that, oh, sure, gender equality should be there, but there are remarks, like you mentioned as well, a big example of Deepak, and there are major multiple examples of people who, although believes in it, but there are of course subtle remarks and daily sort of microaggression, which is of course present. So I wanted to understand, how do we actually address this? Because there's a lot of work which is already present in, so to say, where patriarchy is being questioned, because everyone is aware how it's sort of harmful to the larger society. So I wanted to understand, how do we address particularly this, where people, although do think consciously that it's not a, like, gender equality should be the way, but on reality of it, of course, there are subtleties and nuances where the remarks conveys, like this example and multiple examples which you mentioned, that they clearly don't actually believe in it. Of course, there's a conditioning and a lot of aspects to it. And second question I have is in terms of considering all of that, because you mentioned the word vulnerability, and I think that was a very interesting concept, so to say. So I wanted to understand, considering all of that in mind, how do we then understand the concept of vulnerability in conjunction to these ideas?
Thank you so much for that. Would we like to take a couple of questions together and then answer them, or like, would you want to answer it? Yeah, cool. Gavish has a question. Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Hi, Dr. Philip. It was a pleasure to listen to you. So I have two questions pertaining to the feminist movement and its impact on queer rights. So I'll very quickly ask the two questions. So the first question goes like, you mentioned about Deepak and how he took pride in the office having a 50-50 ratio of men and women. But that still doesn't account for the trans folks or other gender minorities, right? So the concerns of the queer people have been rendered invisible to some extent. And do you think this failure or this invisibility accounts to the the progress made by the feminist movement, wherein we have been successful into advocating for women's rights to some extent and mainstreaming their rights into the society, but the feminist movement has probably not been as successful in making visible the concerns of the queer people. So, your thoughts on that? And the second question would be, um, do you think with the rise of men's rights movement, as you mentioned, and other anti-gender forces, especially when there is also a manosphere that we speak of in today's time, do you think this is a failure on the feminist movement's part to keep these forces in check, wherein the feminist movement has probably been restricted to elite circles or purely academic circles and has probably not come out in public to match or keep in check these anti-gender forces and movements? So would like to hear your thoughts on those. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that. I think we can answer these two first, and we can take more questions later on. Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Mehak and Gavish. Thank you. What a important set of comments and questions. Mm, I have so many things to say. Maybe I'll start with the Mehak's points, right? So people believing in gender equality but not doing anything. I think this is becoming more and more an important concern, right? And as Gavish is saying, there's online discourse, there's the manosphere, there is all kinds of discussion. Men are watching Instagram reels and they are looking at gym videos and pro culture and things. I think change has to happen from there. That discussion, the content, the media content, the creative content that men are consuming, that stuff has to change, and that has to have much more gendered understanding, because as we were saying, men now have more and more sophisticated language to talk about gender inequality, right? It's more difficult to see the red flags. So a current project I'm working on is on dating apps, and I'm particularly looking at Tinder and Grindr. And I did some interviews of people using Tinder and Grindr in India and in Kerala also, in Delhi and in Kerala. And it was so interesting. These women were telling me that it's actually difficult now to know the red flags because all the men sound like they are very positive. They're getting their bios from Chat GPT or from other places. They know exactly what to write, that I'm animal friendly, I love women, I love trekking, yoga, whatever. They are very, I can see the laughing faces. So I can, it is somehow it's become a parody almost, right? It's very difficult, as this one woman said, that it's very difficult to find the red flags now because all the profiles look so gender equal. They look like they are decent guys. So I think that is becoming and will continue to become more and more an issue. But along with that, we have a very strong backlash against this kind of um, gender equal speak, right? So we have more and more the manosphere, and we have more and more like very violent online spaces. These these influencers online on Instagram that I've been looking at, they have very misogynistic songs, they have very misogynistic content, and there is sort of a reassertion of violent patriarchy, that women belong in the home and the man is the one who is going to go out and fight and do all of these things. And that's a global thing. It's not just happening in India. In South Africa, in the US, with Trump now, for example, there is a resurgence of very violent patriarchal masculinities with a lot of aggression in them. And the manosphere is part of this, right? Andrew Tate and these other influencers who are very prominent on the manosphere, they are extremely violent. They say that, yeah, anyway, maybe their content already more than I do. But so I think that's the complication that we have to look at. I think cultural products, media can make a big difference. Us having this conversation is very important. Like, we are talking about it, we're thinking about it. But actually, we need maybe more Bollywood films that look at what masculinities and the challenges of masculinities are. We might need more Hollywood films. We might need more shows on Netflix, on other OTT platforms that look at the cultural production of masculinities, because that is very wide ranging. It can have very wide reach and impact, much more than any books or articles that we might write, as colleagues in academia. Any kind of Instagram reel, social media content that we produce, that will have much bigger reach. And there have been some positive examples. I can think of a few. This one Netflix documentary, which maybe people have seen, called Adolescence, and I know the Wire and Mint had a piece about adolescence. Very sophisticated discussion on masculinities, and it has made a big influence, I think. I mean, I live in the UK, so I know here they have made it free for all the schools, for all school children to watch that program, right? And it's such an important thing because in that program, it's for people who've not watched it, you should watch it. It's on Netflix. It's this one boy who commits a very grievous act of violence towards his classmate, right? And he's a young schoolboy, and the tension is, how do we think about him? Is he a vulnerable boy who's been misled by online media and the manosphere, or is he a violent boy? Right? Is he like a mentally unstable boy? And the documentary tries to do this in a very balanced way. It's problematic, but it's still quite good in trying to show that it's society that's also constructing him. The content is influencing his behavior. He is responsible for his actions, but he's also vulnerable to society and what it teaches him on how to be a boy, how to be a man, right? So that kind of, I think, cultural production is a very important thing, I think, that needs to happen, and more of it needs to happen. I think more Bollywood films. We need less films like Animal and other scary things that I've also watched recently, and slightly more sophisticated, nuanced takes, which may not be such super duper hits like, yeah, these violent films are, but yeah, but there could be a way of thinking about it. Um, to go back to Gavish, your point, I think Bollywood has also done some interesting things with queer cinema. I think and the rise of some queer actors and queer films and queer themes in films, and I think that's also made a big difference in how queer rights are perceived. To go back to one of the things you were saying, I don't think it's a failure of feminism at all, actually. I think it's a failure of men, really, that the manosphere has become so big and so profound. So it's very much our failure rather than the failure of the feminist movement. I think even the queer movement has failed in addressing the rise of the manosphere, right? One of my papers, I'm calling it Respectably Queer, and it's actually about corporate queers, to go back to what you were saying, Avish. And what I found was that queer people in corporate offices do not want to rock the boat. They want to appear like normal people, right? So they do not want to wear any particular kinds of clothes. They don't want to be effeminate. They are scared of being effeminate. And so there is a whole politics of respectably being gay and respectably being queer that is happening in India. And in my research on Grinder, for example, all of this stuff that, that I'm a bro, gym bro, and gay men reproducing heteronormative ways of being a man, reproducing heteronormative masculinity is a very big problem. And that is contributing to what the idea of a real man is, what his body looks like, going to the gym, the kind of work that's required, how you cultivate it, how you speak, how you talk. This real phobia for anything that is effeminate, right? To become these macho gays, that we are manly gays. So I actually think it's not the feminist movement at all. This is all the fault of men and masculinities. And I think we have to own up to it and think about strategies for the next steps. I think more men need to become cultural producers. So Gavish, I would urge you and encourage you and any other men listening to start producing TikTok reels or start producing Instagram reels and putting things out in the world that might change the conversation of what it means to be a man and a masculine person, right? So it's not, I think, the failure of the feminist movement at all, but it's a failure of men. And it's not just the question of rights. It is also moving beyond rights. So even with the women's movement, we have had some rights in place. We still need more rights, but we also need cultural change, right? With queer rights, we have some legal protection, but that doesn't mean we have social and cultural equality. So, beyond rights, what happens beyond rights? How is cultural change happening? And for that, I still think Bollywood media is quite an important site. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much for those answers. I think both were really insightful. Any other questions? You can either raise your hands or maybe just type out that in the chat box and we'll read it for you. Yeah, Professor Dr. Saha has a question. Yeah.
No, I just didn't have a question. I actually just wanted to add a couple of things. So I think the idea about only yesterday I had a lecture. I teach maternal health, and yesterday I had a lecture about the role of men in pregnancy and childbirth and fatherhood. And as my PhD was on the same topic. So exactly, I made the same point that none of us can achieve what Bollywood can achieve. So if they making a movie on men's involvement, so example, I gave the example of the series called Single Papa, which has been released on Netflix. It talks about how Kunal Khemo is the actor and he wants to adopt a boy. It's a wonderful example of like how showing the challenges and vulnerabilities of men in that particular context. And the second thing is, I think around one question which I wanted to, I would just on one thought or observation is that going forward, right, like I think the challenges will become more intense around this one because of AI or because of adoption of AI, job losses, and the broader economic situation. So I see what's happening is that in India, it's like there are two parallel things happening at the same time. One is the economy is not in a great shape, and globally also there are a lot of job losses in India as well as country. On the other hand, in India, because of affirmative action around gender, caste, and increasing affirmative action. So I feel that the lethal combo of these two issues is really it's being misused by certain male influencers to radicalize men further, right? That okay, see, this is what we always told you, that women are like, for example, Shannon gave the example of the metro, right? That okay, women are always, they are taking us places, they have special quotas, we don't have anything. So I think my worry or my concern is that this is only going to get worse because of the situation, because of the global political or economic factors whatever are there, right? So and this is so and what I see on X as well is that increasingly these are used by men to used by certain male influencers to do. And in the context of UK, like, just to slightly divert a little, this is used by white nationalists to stir anti-migrant hatred, that okay, these are ethnic minority men taking away or jobs of white British men or white British women, right? So I think it's just that the challenge is, I would say that the challenge is going to only become more intense about when we're talking about like addressing the, like, the masculinities that affect women from like lens. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you
I
so
think
much
we
for
have a couple of
those
questions. Yeah.
interventions. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any more? I think we have two questions in the chat
No,
box.
there is Suhasini and I think Mehak has a continued question. Suhasini and Mehak had two questions
Uh,
that's in the chat box. Yeah.
sure. I will read them for everyone. So Mehak says, "Thank you so much, Dr. Philip. One last question: how do you incorporate feminist lens from beyond academic discussions to everyday life?" Suhasini asks, "To what extent do your findings disrupt prevailing models of understanding patriarchal oppression, and what alternative conceptual insights do they offer?" Yes, whenever you're ready. Thank you so much for those questions.
No, thank you. Yeah, both Devanik, Suhasini, and Sudashini. Sorry, and Mehak, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I have so many things. I mean, first of all, I had to watch Single Papa. I have not seen it, but now, so I have got a very good recommendation to watch something. And yes, if other people also have any recommendations for things to watch, I'm always looking out for Netflix recommendations. So please do suggest something. Um, yeah, that could be interesting. So Single Papa, I must go and watch. But absolutely, I agree. We need more of this kind of thing. Mehek, to your question, beyond academic discussion, beyond academic life to everyday life. I think the next point is, I think, an important one. This single papa kind of Netflix shows really are about everyday life beyond the classroom. You can send that as a recommendation to your friends, your family, your mother, parents, aunts, uncles, and show how things are to be thought about or talked about. I think just beginning these conversations outside the classroom, in homes, in places where this kind of a discussion will never reach, where they will not be reading papers or thinking about patriarchal frames. They might watch Single Papa or they might watch something else. So that is one way in which we can go to the everyday world and and make an impact. And I think Devnak is absolutely right. This will is going to become more and more intensified. Along with Single Papa, we have things like the animal also coming. Right? So it's not a either or situation. I think we have to accept that gender equality and ideas of progress are not in one direction, that we are not becoming liberal people or a liberal society. The world is not becoming a liberal society. It's not a linear line that from history to now we are becoming more and more freedom. We are giving more and more freedom to people. There is always a battle and a contestation. The rise of Trump or these other politicians around the world show that actually rights that are fought for can be taken back also. Right? In the US now, they have gone back to discussing basics of reproduction. Right? So, and they might have more things to say about it. But their progress is not happening. It's the reversal. So society is, we constantly, I think, in multiple directions. As much as there are single papa, there is also animal. And so, to your point, that's the thing that you have to keep thinking about. Not finding good men, but challenging all of this old stuff that's taking on more violent forms, more aggressive forms, more and more intensified forms, right? I think particularly with the kind of complications we have with getting jobs and the pressure, that you must shop in particular kinds of shops, you must wear fashionable clothes, you must have some designer clothes. There is so much pressure for consumption in for most middle class people in India, and that consumption is not met by jobs, right, where we have decent income. So that is intensifying the kinds of tensions we have in India right now. And I think it's only going to increase, particularly for young people. So I think Devanik is absolutely right. This is going to all intensify this inequality and this attempt to radicalize. So that's why we also need to intensify the counter, right? An intensified queer movement, an intensified feminist movement, an intensified, a re-energized feminist movement. I think the feminist movement maybe needs other younger people, more dynamism, more new forms of doing things. You know, it's not to say that the feminist movement is also perfect or the absolute right thing. Feminism also has a lot of hierarchies, exclusions, inequalities built in. But maybe, it is the next generation of scholars, of intellectuals, of thinkers, of students who will usher in the next thinking around gender and sexuality. Really, I think the the challenges for our generation on how we will understand our generation and our predicament and then come up with solutions for ourselves. The rise of the digital sphere, the manosphere, these Instagram reels are in our faces, they're in our worlds. And what responses do we give them? That's something that we have to collectively think about. The dark Baithak is a place maybe where we think about what we are doing collectively in this kind of setting. I wanted to look at, yeah, patriarchal oppression, alternative conceptual insights. Yeah, so Hasani, I mean, I think we need alternative conceptual insights, but they are very difficult to imagine. You know, just to say, to combine Mehak and your points, for me, for example, one of the things that I want to do is in my classroom not try to create unnecessary hierarchy. As if the teacher, the professor knows everything, the lecturer knows everything, and the students don't know anything. Particularly when I'm teaching my BA students, my undergraduates, and things, I don't want to recreate unnecessary hierarchy, right? And I think there could be small things that we do in our lives, in our offices, in our workplaces, in our departments, that could do something. But it's not just for the students to do. The professors also have to do things. The bosses also have to do things. The people on the top also have to do things. So I think we have to find alternative ways of relating on an everyday level, alternative ways of creating relation rather than just hierarchical relation, right? Alternative ways of seeing both men and women. I think all of those kinds of things are helpful and important. But I don't have all the answers of how we conceptualize an alternative world. But I think this is something we could do collectively, because it is affecting all of us. So maybe I'll stop again there with some thoughts.
Uh, Thank you so much for those answers. Really, really insightful. Any more questions? Yeah, you can raise your hands or maybe just type out in the chat box. You will take them from there. Isha has raised their hands. Yeah, Isha, go ahead.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much for such a thought-provoking session, and thank you, TheDaak, for organizing this. Dr. Philippe, I was really struck by your use of Simone de Beauvoir's concept of becoming as a framework for understanding masculinity. And you mentioned that just as the Beauvoir showed, how one is not born but rather becomes a woman. And you're exploring how the society teaches men to become men through daily patriarchal structures. But this made me wonder about a key difference. De Beauvoir argued that women become the other through their construction as a woman, and they are defined in relation to men as the universal subject. So, my question is that in this process of becoming a man, um, as you mentioned in North Indian society, do men become subject by default, as the patriarchal promise suggests? Or is there actually a different kind of alienation happening where men are alienated from their own emotional and vulnerable selves in order to perform this narrow definition of masculinity? And if that's the case, is macho vulnerability really about men experiencing the gap, the promised position of the subject, and the lived impossibility of actually inhabiting that position fully?
Yeah, what a sophisticated question, Isha. Thank you. I'm just making a note, the impossibility of living that. You've put it in such a beautiful way. I'm happy to take that question, but maybe if other people have anything else they want to add, I can take that also. And if there are any other suggestions of movies or Instagram or accounts to follow or shows to watch, please do add those also. Yeah, the impossibility of living, of the promise. Yeah. Maybe Isha, if I just answer that question, again, what an interesting thought. Absolutely. For de Beauvoir, there is the becoming of the second sex, right? How does one become a woman? And the title of the book is Becoming the Second Sex. The first sex, the neutral, the universal, is the man and its masculinity. And the second is this. I mean, de Beauvoir is not. I mean, de Beauvoir does a brilliant job with analyzing women's position, but she doesn't understand masculinities as also produced in a. I mean, as a. Okay, she does, and it is an act of power, but that not all men have equal forms of power. Right? So there could be hierarchies of men. So there could be white men and then there are Indian men. There could be upper caste men and lower caste men. There could be straight men and gay men. There are hierarchies between men, amongst men, that are also at play in all of this. So the masculine subject is almost as complex as the feminine subject, right? And there is a process of becoming this subject, of creating the subjectivity that I think, yeah, is different but also similar to de Beauvoir and how de Beauvoir thinks about the process of becoming. Becoming, I mean, I'm not a philosopher in the way de Beauvoir was. I am a sociologist. And so I have to break down the idea, this abstract idea of becoming, into social processes. Like, how does one actually become a man? Or how does a boy become masculine? And for that, I have to, in my book, for example, look at everyday acts, how men are supposed to talk. So when I was doing field work, people used to say, "Oh, your voice is too low. You should speak too high. You should speak like have a lower voice because that's a more masculine voice, and you shouldn't wear kurtas because kurtas are too like flowy and long and in a particular shape. You should wear like shirt and trousers." They also used to say, "Oh, that kurtas also give you the wrong shape. They give you a triangle V. They make your hips bigger. So you have to do this kind of V, the gym shape V, where your shoulders are bigger. So you have to wear things with like shoulder pads and like blazers that will make your top half bigger, right? All of these things were anxieties that men had. They were things that they were telling me that they were trying to practice themselves. They were all obsessed with making their shoulders bigger and their other parts of their body smaller, right? Or speaking in a deep voice, not smiling too much. These were all anxieties. So to me, these became the becomings, the everyday becomings that I was interested in studying, right? There was an everyday anxiety in how one becomes gender. It is not natural that men walk with their legs open, right? Men are trained by society to walk with their legs open. So young men used to tell me, "Oh, that I don't walk with my legs open enough." They used to say, "If you want to sit down, you sit with your legs open. If you walk with your legs open. And if you're talking, you talk with a deeper voice. Don't laugh so much." Right? They used to tell me all of these things to train me to become a better man. So the impossibility of becoming a man and the script are also an everyday occurrence, I think. They are not just an existential question. Even on the everyday, a man is taught not to laugh, not to cry, not to sort of express too much emotion. But men have a lot of emotions. They are often scared, they are nervous, they are uncomfortable in lots of situations, but they are not allowed to show it. Right? They're not allowed to express their vulnerability. So de Beauvoir is working on an analytical philosophical level, and I am working on a everyday sociological level. So for me that's where the becoming takes on a different importance, but is also important. There is absolutely, as you said, the impossibility of living that subject position, but also the impossibility of the performance of gender, right? De Beauvoir does not think of gender as performance, and for me, like Judith Butler and stuff are more inspiring scholars who talk about the performativity of gender, where we are performing gender. We are not, gender is not something that we are, it is something that we do, right? Gender is something that we do, not something that we are. So how do we do gender? How do we become gender? So that's how I was thinking about it. But I'll stop there. But thanks, Isha. That's an interesting thought.
Do we have any more question? I guess if there are no more questions, then I think we can then wrap the session up. Can we just, if there are any more question, please write it, or please, I don't think there are any more questions right now. It was such an insightful session. So we can end the session, I hope. Right? So
Yeah, and maybe I just want to say my thanks to everybody for being here. Do please email me if you want to talk at all. You'll find my details online. And yeah, what a pleasure. So thank you, Devanik. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to the Dark for all of the for organizing this. Thanks.
yeah, I thank you for agreeing to do this with us, and it was such a great, insightful talk. We would also be in talk with you. Thank you, Devnak, for agreeing to be a discussion. It was such a wonderful session, and thank you everyone for joining. And we'll meet the next week for another Baithak. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye.